We're live.
Not really, but I guess we're live. We're talking right now.
Yeah.
But when you're listening to this, it's 100% not live.
Kind of a bummer. Maybe one day.
Yeah, who knows? But you know, we're here and we're talking through the book of Genesis.
Still, we're yes, we are still going through that.
Yeah, and when you think about it, we've been doing this for a while, and we are on chapter 14, which means we're about a little over a fourth of the way through the book of Genesis, which means we have a long way to go.
It's gonna be good.
Yeah.
It's gonna be cool.
But it's great to look through and see how it just continues to build on itself.
Still trekking with Abram.
Yeah, we're trekking with Abram. We'll be with Abram for the long haul.
The gang.
Yeah, we'll turn into Abraham, same person.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. But our section for this episode, it's a little interesting. It's a little weird because it just sort of comes up like randomly. Our narrative, it kind of ends with Abram and Lot kind of like, okay, you have your space, I have my space, and so we're good to go.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, it's just like, okay, well now there's like a war, and you're like, wait, what the heck? It doesn't really make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And we don't have any time frame of like, they left Egypt, they both settled in their own lands, but we don't know how much time has happened.
Yeah, not really.
Okay.
And so this is one of those things where it's almost like they're focusing more on the message of the story that they're trying to tell you, and they're focusing less on like trying to tell you a historical account of how this is happening.
Got it.
And yeah, so it's really interesting. But here we get like a paragraph and a half, 2 paragraphs, just full of just geography, basically.
So it's like geography, genealogy.
Sort of.
Kind of.
We're just they're letting us in on all of these different people and where they're from. And so we get to see this really interesting thing, and we see these kings that are coming together and they're wanting to fight each other. And the premise behind this is that they're trying to fight each other, and then our boy Lot gets caught in the mix.
Come on, Lot.
Yeah, and so this chapter, this section, we're going to stop at verse 16. And so talk through like verse 1 through verse 16. But this little section, it kind of has 3 parts. There's 1 through 11, which is like the battle scene. And it's kind of setting up that whole thing. Then there's verse 12, which is like the transitionary scene. And then there's verses 13 through 16, which is where Abram comes in and saves the day, which is why this is titled Abram Rescues Lot. And so it's an interesting one, but it's one that I think we can very quickly just kind of skip over because like, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
there's names.
Yeah,
there's names.
I was just reading through this with Haley, my wife, the other day.
Your now wife.
My now wife, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And we were going through, and I remember when we were reading through it, there are a lot of really complicated names. So just from the get-go, that's pretty frustrating because you're trying to get into it, and then you're just like, I can't say this name. Ariak King, Alazar, and when we were going through it, I just feel like we were reading so fast, and I was just thinking in my head of like, man, this feels like genealogy. I feel like I need a map. I feel like I need crayons for people who say it properly. I don't. I'm sorry. I'll just stick to pens. Crayons. You know, like you want to draw it up and like just get it out on paper and just see.
I love how your preferred method is using a crayon.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
But I mean, hey.
Yeah.
Go for it, you know?
It's more creative.
Yeah. You got all kinds of different colors.
So sticks on the page very well, too.
It does.
It's waxy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know. Like, I definitely agree with you that this could get breezed over quickly. Just from like first read through, you're like, okay, a lot of weird names, some locations not really from the east, so I don't really understand any of the geography over there. But I think that's always been something that I've wanted to kind of sit in, but I haven't really done before. Of just sitting in like the geographical landscape of what's actually happening.
Yeah, well, a lot of this too is you don't even have to be like a scholar and know all these names. Oh yeah, like that king. Oh my gosh, let me tell you all about this king.
How cool would that be though?
That would be really cool. That would be really cool. But you don't have to know all that to get what these authors are trying to do in this story.
Yeah. And
you don't have to know all the individual histories of everything. You don't have to read this and not scratch your head and wonder what's happening, to still be able to get the full meaning of the story.
Yeah.
And so we just get to see different styles. And something like this kind of leads us to believe that maybe there's a different writer who's coming in and adding in this section. All kinds of different theories that lead us to where we are today. But really what it is it's a story of confusing kings with confusing names coming in and just getting angry at each other. And so we'll kind of look into it a little bit, because there are some familiar names amidst all the names that don't really make sense. There are some names that will turn on the light bulb, so to speak, and allow us to remember this. So the first one is the king of Shinar. We see in the very first verse, there's Amraphel. He's the king of Shinar. Shinar, do we remember what this land is from? We've seen this word a few other times in Genesis.
I feel like this has definitely come up in the Abram story once, at least, hasn't it? Or am I totally off?
I don't think it has.
Well, maybe I'm thinking of this one.
The other two times it's shown up is in Genesis 10 and Genesis 11.
Okay.
The land of Shinar is where Babel and Babylon are built upon.
Oh, so close.
Yeah. And so this is one of the beauties of being able to sit in the genealogies a little bit and be able to at least get a little bit of a working knowledge of some of those people, especially in these early genealogies where we're like, man, this is really like laying a foundation for going forward, what we're going to see, who we're going to meet. And so we're seeing that as we go through this biblical story, these authors are going to be picking back from that basket of all those names and places that they told us about. And they're going to be like, hey, this person that we talked about back in Genesis 10, they're coming back and their people are here and they're doing some bad things. And so we know the land of Shinar doesn't have a great reputation.
Not if it's associated with Babel.
Yeah.
That's bad.
Right.
Bad news bears.
Yeah, this is all coming off of Nimrod and his ability to create cities.
With bitumen? No. That's something else.
Oh, with bitumen? I
thought that was like the brick and
yes.
mortar or something.
Yeah.
Was it called bitumen?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, it's somewhere
so.
there. Yeah.
I remember that word.
There we go. But Nimrod, he's creating cities. He's creating all the major enemies of the Israelites.
What a Nimrod.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And I actually found out that that Nimrod, it only recently became a negative term.
Really?
Only back in, I want to say the 1960s, Nimrod became a negative term. And that for most of history, Nimrod was a positive term, which meant that you were like a really good hunter. Because that's what Nimrod was.
We talked about this.
Did we?
Yeah. I think you brought it up when we were first going through genealogy.
Okay. Yeah.
Whenever he was mentioned first.
Yeah. So Nimrod is actually, it was actually almost a compliment.
Huh.
But now
people read their Bibles and
it's
they're
kind of reversed.
Oh, we probably shouldn't have that be a compliment.
So, because he was a great hunter, just not for the right reasons, I guess.
Yikes.
But yeah, and so we see the king of Shinar. This guy he's here, he's hanging out, and that means that not a lot of good probably can come from this little meetup. We also see that there's the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah. And we know from a later story that these are not going to be great. But we also know that Lot, when he in the last chapter, when he went and chose where he was going to stay, he ended up hanging out on the like outskirts of Sodom. Remember that? He's in the tent outside of Sodom.
Mm-hmm.
And so we said these people are here, which means, oh no, they're coupled in with this king from Shinar, and you're like, this probably isn't the greatest place to be, you know?
It's like walking down school and you just see those kids hanging out, near the cafeteria, and like, them both from different classes, but they're both pretty disruptive. And you're just looking at them and you're like, I don't want to really get 20 feet close to those people. I'm gonna go down this hall instead and just avoid them.
Yeah. Kind of a specific scenario, but I see what you I see what you mean. Where they're setting you up, and I think that's what these authors are doing. Is there's all this like detail on where these people are from and their interactions and all of this, and we could if I continued to do more research and we had the time, we would be here for hours.
We'll come back to this narratology part 2.
Yeah, maybe in 5 years when who knows where we're at.
We'll do a whole series on Genesis 14. It'd be like 20 episodes long.
There we go. But the reality is that they're just trying to set up that there's this really, really, really bad scenario. And I think that's really to bring it back to like layman's terms, for the everyday Bible reader, they're setting up that there's this place that you do not want to be. And there's this situation that is really bad and that is not going to end well at its current state. Mm-hmm. If it's just left to where it's at, things are not going to go well. And so we see that we can go down to verse 11. So kind of at the very end of this section where they're just like, guys, this is not a great place to be. We see, so the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. And so within all these interactions and like this kind of battle, they end up taking things from Sodom and Gomorrah. And so those kings, I guess, kind of ended, things didn't go in their favor. And so they lost possessions, which this is like the third or fourth time that we see them talking about possessions, which is kind of interesting in that most of the time before it was kind of positive with Abram and Lot getting their possessions, right? But now we're seeing a negative sense where they're losing possessions. And then they also took Lot. So one of the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah was Lot himself.
They took the whole lot, didn't they?
Yeah, the son of Abram's brother who was dwelling in Sodom. So now he's in Sodom.
He's not in his tent anymore.
Yeah. So now he's just like straight up in Sodom.
Come on, Lot.
Come on. What are you doing, man?
Come on, buddy.
And they also took his possessions and they went their way. And so now we're in this situation where we're like, oh my gosh, Lot, he's coming in and you're like, what are you doing, dude? Like you're just dragging down the team. You're not making things go well. And like, what are we going to do? And so then this is where the camera, it pans over to our hero of the day, which is Abram. And so we're seeing kind of an upward trajectory of Abram and how he is acting out his faith. Yeah. And it's really cool to see.
That's 2 instances now, right? After the whole Pharaoh thing. Yeah. And he trusted and was kind of slower with divvying out the land, like, hey, like you take your land and then I'll choose what's left. And then now we see another example of him kind of being a hero type figure.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
That upward trajectory, like you're saying.
Yeah. And so we're seeing that actually his character is going to ebb and flow throughout the story. And that he's not just one straight character of either being perfect or being really terrible, but that he's really showing a prime example of us and how we act out our faith, right? Yeah. And that we are constantly ebbing and flowing in how we are carrying out our allegiance to Jesus, right? And so Abram is in the same sense. And so I find this to actually make him so much more relatable as a character. Yeah. Seeing that he does fail, but that he also gets back up and he keeps going. So we're kind of we had that first section 1 through 11. Then we had that mini sort of transitionary segue section, which is they also have Lot. Like, darn it, they got Lot. Now we're in the third section.
That'd be like right in between like the first and second, or like third film. It's like you're in a hanging spot. Like, oh, what's gonna happen?
Yeah.
I was thinking it doesn't work with movies, TV shows.
It might work with movies. You know, like at the end of Marvel movies, after the end credit scenes,
Oh yeah.
how they
yeah.
give you like one little thing that you're like, oh no, like what's gonna happen next?
Well, then you have to wait like a whole year.
Sure.
Whereas,
but
like,
now we
here-
just wait one sentence.
Like, sweet. All right,
Yeah.
get back into
Okay.
it.
Yeah. But we see the camera. It pans over to Abram, and it says, "Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew." This is one of the only times that they refer to Abram or Abraham, whatever
We're
his
not
name
there
is
yet.
at that point. Yeah.
It's
But this is one of the first
secret.
times and one of the only times they refer to him as Abram the Hebrew.
Why do you think they do that?
You know, I think there's this more of this international scale to this story
Mm-hmm.
where they're bringing in all these different kings from all these different lands that they want to, I think, specify Abram and who his allegiance is to. And so some people think it's a cultural thing. Some people think it's a spiritual title. But really what I think it's just the authors wanting to show who Abram has allegiance to. And ultimately, it's not to all these other kings that were mentioned before, but it's actually, Abram's actually Hebrew. His allegiance is to Yahweh.
That's cool. I also noticed kind of one other thing that they do right after that, who was living by the oaks. Is that a play on words where, we've seen that oak-like structure before in the past
Yeah, well, and it's almost like we see that
with the
Lot-
altars?
Well, yeah. Lot was going in and he went outside of Sodom. Then he just went inside Sodom.
Mm-hmm.
But we see Abram, he's staying exactly where God called him to be, right? Abram is not wavering.
Yeah.
He's not like, oh, I'm here. But actually, I'm going to go to a different place. But Abram is being faithful to God by following him in that specific place. And so he's staying where God has called him to stay. And so it's actually a really interesting thing that we get to see
I like that.
throughout this. Yeah, so we're really just seeing that Abram is wanting to stay in the place where God has called him to be. And for him, that is the oaks of Mamre. And so he's there, and we see that these people that were allies of Abram, they come back and they say, hey, Lot, he was taken. He was one of the possessions of Sodom almost that was taken up. And so when Abram, it says here in verse 14, when he heard that his kinsmen, so not when he heard that Lot was, when Lot was being Lot and going out and getting himself in trouble, essentially. But he actually says that when he heard that his kinsmen, so this title that he used earlier, right, when they were talking about divvying up the land, that gives him so much more of a respect and honor. And something that Lot doesn't really deserve, but that he gives him this familial title anyway. And that even though Lot's putting himself in situations where a kinsman is probably not going to be the best way to describe him, Abram still refers to him as his kinsman, which is a really, really cool thing to see. And so when he heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he had led forth his trained men, born of his house, 318 of them.
What a number.
Yeah, which is not a lot,
No.
right?
Well-
and I mean, it's a good amount, but it's not like it's not like a full army.
Yeah. It's like a biker gang.
Yeah. Like a really big biker gang.
Could do some damage.
Yeah. And so then they go out, and it says, and he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and he defeated them, defeated all the kings. And so this doesn't necessarily mean that some people think that, like, oh my gosh, Abram went out and defeated all these kings with their huge armies.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that. There's actually more theories that kind of point to the idea that these kings came with smaller groups and that they weren't coming with like their huge national armies. You know? But still, the fact that Abram is able to come out with his 300 dudes and just go to town and take out these different kings and their prospective armies, however much they actually had, it really is an act of God, honestly. And we get to see, we'll look at this in our next episode, but that they actually call it an act of God, and that this was God who was working on behalf of Abram. And we see this all the time as we continue through the Old Testament, especially in a lot of battles, that the battles are fought by God and they're fought for God. And when they're not fought by God and for God, that they lose. But when they are fought by God and for God, that they win. We see all these different circumstances, especially in their conquest of the land, like near the end of the Torah and after. We see that this is really how they work. Is that they're fighting these battles that don't really make a lot of sense. Yeah. But that they're winning because God's on their side.
Well, they're trusting God.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Totally.
Huh.
And so then it ends with, then he brought back all the possessions and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the woman and the people.
I like how they separate that. Brought back all the possessions. One might read over that and just think, oh yeah, Lot's included in the possessions. But then again, you see like this honor aspect of him separate, or at least it being portrayed as him being the kinsman, not just lumped with the possessions. Just in the wording of it. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, totally. It is actually really interesting to see that that Lot is given, I feel like when he is grouped in with Abram, he's actually given more respect. And he's given a title of kinsman. And that his actions shouldn't really warrant that, but that he gets it anyway. And so it's really cool to see actually that with that, the possessions that were lost and these things that probably have a history from being gained back in like Genesis 12, with the whole thing with Egypt and everything, that these possessions are now coming back to them. And so the things that made it impossible for them to dwell in the land together, they now have them back, I guess.
It's like a double stack too of God's graciousness, because you see God didn't need to give them their possessions back. Like he could just said, cool, you guys, you won your battles, you got a lot back, cool, you're good. But like, no, God is good, God is gracious. He even allowed the possessions to return and all of that.
And that can sometimes, we can lose that in a story where it's just like, I don't know. I feel like before really diving into this way of reading the scriptures, I would have seen these names and be like, oh, okay, like that's kind of cool. But then I would just kind of skipped over it and then gone to the next section. But you lose this whole reality that they're in this like total like valley of a situation. And Lot gets himself in a really, really rough situation. And it's ultimately all because of his doing, because he wants to go to a place in the land that he wanted to go to back in Genesis 13. And so he wants to go there, but then he kind of gets himself in this rough situation. But it's ultimately God using Abram to save him that takes him out of this really, really difficult situation, and brings him up out of it. And it is a really cool testament to God's grace. Yeah. Where he really he doesn't have to keep Lot, keep him around, because it seems like Lot just kind of wants to just go off and do his own thing all the time. And he's just kind of the really annoying nephew that you're like, why are you doing this? Why are you making things so difficult? But God still wants to keep him in the story.
Just living life. Just let me do what I want.
Just let me do it. Come on. Why not? Yeah, exactly.
maybe one final thing before we close. I don't know if this is just how we're raised or just modern culture, but I feel like we tend to read a lot of stories with like hero goggles on. Like you're reading it and you like you were saying, you're picking up on the names like, oh, there's Lot, there's Abram. Cool. I'm going to try and figure this out probably before the story's through. And then like, you're not really doing the story justice. Cause like for us, we could have just totally read over that right now.
Yeah.
And be like, oh wow, we could have entirely missed that character aspect of how awesome and gracious God is. Whereas like if you're just reading it with your hero goggles on, you're like, sweet, yeah, Abram, hero of the day, cool, next, and you just keep going. So
totally,
I feel like that's maybe just a good thing to do when you read through the Bible is like try to take off those hero goggles, put on the Hebrew Crocs, and just slow down.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Get into the place of how someone who was reading this at their time, at the time that this was being really, really like the time this was being written and sent out and distributed, get into their mindset and think, how would they really think about this?
They didn't see 23 Marvel films.
Yeah.
I mean, they may have heard like war stories of, kings fighting and stuff.
Yeah. And it's just really interesting to see how ultimately these stories are not just little fables where it's like, oh yeah, cool, Abram won, yeah.
It's grounded in history.
Yeah. Well, and it's really just something that we can turn to and say, hey, this is actually part of a greater, grander story. And it's not just about Abram. It's actually about God.
Yeah.
And it's not just about this guy who comes in and saves the day initially and then just kind of continues life.
Yeah.
But we see this is a story about God using people to save other people, to seek and save the lost, right? And we see that Abram, he goes through, he's in this upward trajectory of this ebb and flow, but it's going to go back down. And we're going to see it go back down in just a few chapters.
He is human after all.
Yeah, totally. And so we get to just continue on this ride and see Abram grow. And part of that means him succeeding. And part of that means him really failing. But we get to see this and to learn from it.
Stick around. We're going to dive in some more.